Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Career Evangelist Podcast. Today, we do not only have one guest, we have two. So that's awesome. We have Ja-Naé and Steve joining us today on the Career Evangelist Podcast. And they are going to be talking about their upcoming book, SuperShift. That's transforming how we live, learn, and work in the age of intelligence. So I'm excited because we are going to be talking about the future of work and how to future-proof your career. Without further ado, let's bring in our guests, Ja-Naé and Steve. Welcome to the show.
Oh, Bola, thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Awesome, awesome. So I must ask you that, guys, what inspired you to explore the future of work?
Oh, long-winded. We could go in so many different paths. Steve, you want to start or you want me to start?
Why don't you go?
Yeah.
I'll-
So we come to it for different reasons, I will say, which I think is also really fascinating to think about as your listeners think about their own journeys. So I used to be an opera singer. That's where I started out. Bola's already giving me a frown. And by accident, I ended up becoming an entrepreneur. So, fast forward, it was through my work, both as an artist and as well as an entrepreneur, that then led me to work with leaders of multinational organizations, trying to identify what are their future systems, how do they work together, what does narrative in this role. What is the role of narrative as we're thinking about moving our systems to the future? And fast forward, what I found was through that work for me, I was wondering why people really couldn't make change, either within their jobs or within their own personal lives. And I wanted to know really what was the catalyst to make that change? How do you start to identify those triggers? And that led me to become a behavioral scientist. So I bring this up because if you asked me 20 years ago if I thought I would ever be a scientist, I'd be like, no, I'm an opera singer. I'm going to live my life, singing around the
Thinking.
world. Exactly. So I bring that up because our paths are never linear in my experience.
No, that's correct. And I guess you just call on Steve and you say, Steve, let's write a book. How did you bring Steve in to join you in on this journey?
Well, I think that Steve has his own journey as far as writing the book. That really started when we met. So, for listeners, we will also give you the secret that Steve and I are also married. So we own several companies together and have written now two books and working on our third. So, Steve, what about your journey?
Well, I'm not an opera singer. And you're all probably very much better off since that's the case. So, for me, I've been in technology for about 35 years and designing products, doing a lot of innovation work. But my grounding is as a futurist. I read Alvin Toffler when I was 13. Future Shock. It's an amazing book. It's still even relevant today. And I was like, you can do this as a job. I was like, wow. My path was a little more traditional, but whereas as a futurist now, it's a term that conjures up a lot of thoughts. It's about exploring possible futures, what it means for long-term strategy. But when I came to this, the first book we did was came out in 2016 called The Startup Equation. And that was a very visual book like business model generation. That was about a framework to help people of all shapes and sizes. Like doesn't have to be like a tech startup, but to build a business because we had had a lot of experiences and we wanted to kind of help people uh, not have the same pain, avoid a lot of the pains that we went through. And I think with this book, we both are we both come at this in complementary ways. You write a book, you have a lot of your own skills and strengths, and also the things that you need to find other people to help you with that are not so strong. I think with us, Janae's more of a systems thinker. It's her job as a behavioral scientist. As a futurist, for me, I also am a macro historian. I look at large changes, patterns, cycles, and I saw a lot, not just in the next decade, but longer arcs. And we can talk about the ages and eras theory, but we're essentially coming out of an age, a 200 year, and it looks at 200-year ages, 50-year eras within that. And when you think about where we were the last 200, right? You can talk about the Industrial Revolution, you can talk about information age, all these different names, but the last, we call it the age of machines. And these are the things that drove change in the world. And it's not just about technological innovation, but it drove massive amounts of change. Now we look at the age of intelligence, where we're not just entering a kind of different future, we're really building it in real time. And if we can get to that, especially with careers, right? We're feeling change at an accelerated rate, so much that we feel it, not just the slower passage of change in which we can adjust or learn new skills or maybe pivot careers or do change. It is overwhelming for many. And because of that, we're kind of having to kind of build new careers and rethink things in real time. See, and it's more than just artificial intelligence, right? This is the fusion of human and artificial and even networked intelligence. So we're creating machines and things that are and technology that's smarter than the human brain for
Right.
the first time in history, right? What does that do? And what does that space open up for us? Maybe the careers we've always wanted, the jobs we've always wanted to do, right? What does that mean for growth? The so-called corporate ladder. So, yeah,
So, no, I'm going to pick up on
yeah,
that, Steve.
yeah,
When you say futurist, and this word, I know it's about maybe planning for the future, but
right.
you also mentioned the accelerated changes going on around us, the massive change that we are all dealing with, not just in terms of artificial intelligence, but with all the technological development that we are currently managing in our world. So,
Mhm.
how can you tell someone, knowing all these variables, to prepare for that future? What are some strategic steps that they need to take in order to position themselves and future-proof their career?
Jenny, you want
Yeah,
to take
I'll
that?
kick it off and then why don't you build on it? So what I would say for all of your listeners is first unlearn what you know.
Okay, we should unlearn. I like that.
And the reason why, and Steve touched upon this, we are coming out of this 200-year arc, right? Where we've had, historically, we have stayed at the same company doing the same job or similar jobs for, 40, 30, 30 to 40 years. We have a centralized model around education. We have an idea of what business needs to look like. We know, and we saw this during COVID, we saw that start to break and start to fragment apart. And we are feeling the tensions now as, employers are telling people to come on back to the office. But we know that that system no longer works. But we don't have a new one to replace it. And so when I say unlearn, it's be really reflective about what are the heuristics and the shortcuts that you make in your daily work, in your daily life. When you're thinking about what your career looks like, how can you allow yourself to take a step back and imagine not what your career looks like, but what do you actually want to spend your time doing? How do you create value in the world? Can that look different? I mean, can you create similar value, but have that translate into different ways? We are moving and we're already there. We just don't realize we're there. We're going to shift more towards this. we are moving more into what we consider having a portfolio career, and that could be a mix of working full time at one place while maybe working part time at another. Maybe you have a startup on the side, or you want to live the lifestyle of a freelancer, and so you have that, and then you pick and choose some of the work that you're doing. We have this opportunity to really redesign what that looks like. But in order to do that, we have to allow ourselves to sort of shed that old skin,
Mhm.
relearn or unlearn some of those skills so that we can then come to this with a fresh set of eyes. And then the other thing that I will say, and then I'd love to hear what Steve wants to build upon in this regard, is we have become pretty, in my mind, pretty complacent and are used to convenience.
Right.
And because of that, since we are feeling such stress around the technological, this rate of technological growth, as well as everything else that's happening in our landscape today, it very much is bogging many people down, and they're feeling like they're on cognitive overload. So, how can you detach a little bit, but then allow for what I consider controlled stress brought into your life? How can you add a bit of stress, but in a way in which you start to control it so that you're used to bringing that stress into your life and you learn how to thrive with it? If it's only when we start to take ownership of our lives and of our careers and what that pathway starts to look like, will we really feel like, all right, I can explore because I know that though I don't know the path exactly where I'm going, I have a general idea. Steve,
Mm.
you want to build upon that?
Yeah, a few things. I think, I mentioned the term like climbing the corporate ladder. Career ladders they're gone, right? It's about think of yourself as building an ecosystem. You're an ecosystem builder. The project work, the different things that you do, part this, part that.
Mhm.
And, leadership really it kind of isn't really the title anymore. It's more of a skill set. I have this debate a lot of whether a futurist is a job or a skill. And we could have that debate for a good, I'm sure, a good 30 minutes. But it's also adding that as part of the skill set. And I write a newsletter on LinkedIn right now called Future Proof. And
Mhm.
it's about future proofing your career. You have to build it on the idea of transformation, not because stability, it's not a goal at this point. You have to have the ability to transform, and it's fast. It's a constantly changing thing. And I think the other thing to keep in mind too is it's about co-creation with others. The best careers are built in collaboration with others, and that's going to include machines. The more that they get smarter with agentic technology and the ability to automate a lot, you're going to co-create and you're going to collaborate with those as not just tools, but real kind of digital twins and partners. I think the last thing I would include is that make sure that when we talk about personal brand, you know about the career brand that you're trying to be out there, you got to be purpose driven, purpose led in that way. It's not just about the influencer getting followers or subscribers. It's if you have that, if it's aligned with that purpose, it's sustainable, and it's also gives you the ability to pivot, transform, change as the change happens to you. So it allows you to be more dynamic in that way. So I think those are my five things that I would.
Oh, I totally enjoy this. Starting from when Ja-Naé said portfolio career, we have to take ownership. We have to thrive with stress. I know that can be challenging. And she
Yeah.
also mentioned that we have to. You said we have to learn how to transform. We have to have that ability. And co-creation. This involves collaboration with others, and we should be purpose driven in order to future-proof our career. So these are great things that anyone should be able to pick up and learn. And now let's go to your book, Super Shift. You have nine super shifts that you discuss in your book. Can you
Mhm.
break? Maybe you can take two or three, or you can
Yeah.
take one each and tell us about those super shifts.
Let's do one each, Steve. You want to start?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I always do my go-to is generational drift. I mean, I could talk about, IntelliFusion, Texcelerate. I mean, everything is in there. It goes over energy and ecology. I think anyone reading it is going to find a few they're definitely living in and other ones that are fascinating. But generational drift is chapter 5. It's the first super shift. A lot of my work around cycles theory or just change, large scale macro history change is generational theory. So they look at generations right now about every 20 years. You could argue when things start or when end, but the reality is there's usually like four alive and that's called a saeculum. Strauss and Howe called it that. It's an 80, 90-year period. And people, since time immemorial have lived, 80, 90, I mean, no more than that, maybe in the hundreds, very few. But what happens when everyone lives to 150, 200? What about when longevity is really longevity or forever? What does that do to the concept of a career, a generation, a multifamily household, right? What does that do to the dynamics of populations? So I think it could be far off when you think about it, but at the same time, there are people now, you would think most people in their 60s or 70s, a lot of people don't want to leave. They want to keep working, right?
Yes.
So we're starting to see it now. And we're seeing even younger people be YouTubers, streamers, become entrepreneurs at 14, 15. So mm, we're starting to see the beginnings of that. So what happens? So that's my favorite one. What's yours, Janae?
Well, my favorite one is Reality Remix. And the reason why is that it very much gets to the research that I do when we will get to a point where we have interoperability, where we are moving, if you will, between virtual worlds, such as, anything in VR, or we can even say Roblox at this point, where, there's still experiences having or to be had or what we've known with Second Life, to what we know as more of the digital twins of buildings and the holographic experience that we will have. What we're starting to see, which is really fascinating and lovely, is how do we start to have some of those shared experiences through holograms? So, for example, there's a pizza place out in the UK that is working with Virgin Media so that you can have dinner with family that lives on the other side of England with a holographic projection of them, but there's still that shared experience. So we also have out in Saudi Arabia, they are building what is known as a cognitive city. And the project, if you will, imagine waking up in the morning right at 6:45 where the light is shining very softly into your room. If you drink coffee, coffee is immediately given to you. You have a transport pod that picks you up, and you're having meetings in that pod before you head into the office because you have to go into the office that day. And you're moving, if you will, between a blurred reality of what we know as real and then this overlay, if you will, of a digital twin of these of not only these buildings but also of what the interfaces understand and know as your preferences. And so much will be predicted as far as what your needs are, which is why I come back to where do we start? And it's about the unlearning. And it's also about thinking around critical thinking. How do we make sure that as we start to blur these worlds and these realities, which will take a little bit of time, but again, if we're experimenting with these two examples now, those are just two examples in a large portfolio of examples. We are going to need to be able to double down on our critical thinking muscle, if you will, and really understanding the life that we want to lead versus the life that is going to sort of nudge us, if you will, into an experience. And so I think that's why it's my favorite, because it makes me now question what is real, and it also makes me question what can we do today versus what options will we have tomorrow. And I think the more that we think about this today, the more possibilities that we will have later on.
No, that's so good. So, thinking today about how to position ourselves for the future, that's the takeaway that I'm getting from there. Now, one of the technological development that is staring all of us in the face is this artificial intelligence. And I want to ask you guys, should we be worried about AI?
Do you want
Uh,
to start? Or you want me to
yeah,
start?
yeah, yes, yes, if we don't put um core memory rules and systems in. I'm not talking because you don't want to regulate it. You also don't want to have it in the hands of a few, and then we're going to create a digital robber barons, a whole new potential for subjugation and a digital authoritarianism,
Mhm.
manipulation of what information gets out into these systems, because humans train the bot, so the bias comes in that. There has to be this, there has to be a limit to um, what it can learn, when it does learn, what happens to the knowledge. Um, yeah, I mean, I one of the other interviews we did, I had done some work on uh, it's stuff in my notes. It was not in the book, around kind of like the laws around, like the laws of robotics, like Asimov did.
Mhm.
I think that there should be laws for AI that govern how it treats humanity so it doesn't turn into Skynet and decide we're the problem. Um, so, Janae, what would you
Yeah,
you
so yeah, to
agree with
build off
me?
of what Steve's saying, so there are some really great and smart folks working on governance mechanisms for us
Mhm.
to consider when it comes to AI, and I appreciate a lot of that work that folks are doing. I think what if we want, if we think we should be concerned, it's only because we don't realize the power that we have in our hands now. What I mean by that is, many people find themselves in conversations at work and they don't realize that they're helping to train maybe the algorithms within their own organization. And if they're not working cross-functionally with the rest of the organization on where the bias, where the gaps in our thinking around biases, where do we have assumptions in our thinking around maybe, we see a lot of examples around this, around the employment and application process.
Mhm.
How can we make sure that we're mitigating for those biases now? Because it is how we train these current models, which are not self-learning and very much do need human in the loop. It's getting used to being able to, again, have ownership around the technology that we are creating and not leaving it in the hands of someone else. We all have a moment in time where we have a say in how we start to train some of the models of today. And it's really identifying those dynamics and those opportunities that can lead to, I'll say, better governance later on.
So, on the flip side of being worried or being concerned is being prepared. So,
Right.
when you think about preparing for the future, what would you say are some skill sets that will be indispensable maybe in the next 5 to 10 years?
Um, Two things for me.
Okay.
One is get futures fluent, futures literate, like learn the concept of foresight as a skill set, because when you look at it as another lens or another tool set in which you can look at differently at the future, at possible futures, use signals, use trends. I think that'll power. Because I used it as a stealthy way to do product work, innovation work. Didn't call it futures, but I think that's a huge one. And then the next one I would say is I call future proof types or leadership, where you need to understand the tools and you have to understand that the window is shortening, so that I think that you have to create uh, an autodidactic space for yourself to be always kind of self-learning and adding more things as they come about. So
Yeah, I like that self-learning. So, Ja-Naé, what do you say?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that really I would have people double down on getting curious about and I always have people when I'm working with peak performers or executives, do an audit, identify where your biases are and your assumptions are, because when you start to identify those gaps or even identify where you might have biases, then that's really the doorway to explore other ways to either learn or work or come to a situation or even understand, all right, like how am I showing up in this moment right now today? How do I want to show up? Tell me where you want me to pick up.
Okay, so now I'm just gonna pivot and go to my rapid fire questions. So to you, AI or blockchain, which will have a bigger long-term impact?
Both, but can I tell you why? So imagine blockchain as the foundation for in the infrastructure for much of what we will be doing, how we will be working, how we will be keeping track of things over the next 10 to 15 years. And, folks can talk about blockchain or hashgraph. That's a whole different conversation. AI is very much, I mean, will be an extension of who you are. We're already seeing some of those blends, if you will, where even with amputees, where you have not only machine, but you have AI attached to a prosthetic so that you can start to feel what it's like to pick something up. Or imagine yourself, like I have my cell phone in my hand, imagine yourself as a cyborg. We already have an extension of technology, and it's just going to start to blend even more.
Okay, so I've been speaking with Ja-Naé and Steve, authors of SuperShift, transforming how we live, learn, and work in the age of intelligence. So, Ja-Naé, where can my listeners find your book?
Oh, well, they can find the book at supershiftsbook.com or on Amazon or Barnes& and Noble.
Okay. Finally, what's one key takeaway from your book that you want my listeners to know about?
Oh, so the big thing for me is that we need a whole new way of thinking in order to move forward into the future. And we can't look to the past for that. And so, how can you, as a listener, really say, I want to lead, but in a way that makes sense for me? And so, I am just going to explore. So, the big takeaway here is allow yourself to explore. It might feel like you're failing or you don't know where you're going. That's okay. That is part of the exploration and just have fun with it.
Allow yourself to explore. Thank you, Ja-Naé, for your time. We appreciate you joining us on the show today. It's been a wonderful moment, and thank you.
Oh, well, thank you so much for the time.
All right.